Hello. We're here in St. Mary's, Georgia. Beautiful little community here in southern Georgia. We're almost into Florida at this point. It's so close we can sneeze and we'll make Florida very unhappy. So that's how close we are to Florida. But we're in St. Mary's. One thing I like about this community, it's really a beautiful community. It's very well kept, well maintained. They keep it up well. I can tell they take a lot of pride in this community, and I like that. One of the interesting things that I've learned about this little community since I've been here is it started in 1787 is when it was founded. Back then it was known as Buttermilk Bluff, and it was founded when 19 or 20 men purchased 4 acres of land each, cut up in squares, for a total of $38, and they bought them from Georgia's royal governor at the time, the only stipulation was that they had to build a wooden structure on the property. So they bought all this land, and that's where St. Mary's began, 1787. Really neat community. We're going to walk it and see what they have to offer here in their historic district.
A lot of it was burnt, though. During the Civil War, it was occupied by the Northern forces, and when the Northern forces were leaving, they told the townsfolk, don't signal to the Confederacy that we're gone. Well, 3 little sisters went down to the waterfront to wave them off with their white handkerchiefs, and they took that as a signal, and they came back and burnt the town.
I'm sure we'll come across that in our tour today, something that commemorates that moment. Again, 1787, it's lasted through the Civil War and lasted through the industrial area. It's grown up to be quite a cute little town, so let's see what it's all about. Not so much the visitor center is really Cumberland Island, which is right across there, the water. That's St. Mary's River, Cumberland Island. Visitors are not allowed to drive on Cumberland Island, so the only way to get there is by ferry, and a group just took off on the ferry.
You can take your bike.
Just before we got here. Yeah, I guess you could take your bike or skateboard or whatever. But the island's about 5 miles long, I think, and so if you wanted to walk it, I guess you could walk it. It would take you a while, but once you get there, you'd have to rely on, I'm guessing, I haven't been there, but I would guess that you'd have to rely on local transportation, tour bus or whatever, or taxi or whatever.
Or you walk.
And or I guess you could take your bicycle. But
that park ranger said nothing about public transport on.
He did not. But
Cumberland Island.
I'm just guessing maybe they have a tour guide that drives you around, maybe a tour bus or whatever.
No, I think
it's run. They do have tours that are run by the National Park Service. So I don't know what their transportation plan is. For once they get people off the ferry on the other side, are you on your own? Do they guide you somehow? I don't know. I'm coming up on Wheeler Street, and you can see right here at the end of Wheeler Street, boat launch area with a dock there, dock on the left and dock on the right, and the boat ramp right between them. This is the Bachelot House, built in 1885 by John Bachelot Jr. I'll throw that in there because his dad didn't do it, he did.
Okay.
And it was in the 1900s purchased by Mr. A.M. Peoples and made into a hotel to accommodate winter visitors. Later, it was the Merrill family boarding house, and for about 20 years, the house sat in ruins and was condemned until the National Park Service purchased it and renovated it, and they now use it as their administrative building. And you probably saw a park ranger walk out the front door there, across the street to their visitor center. And that's the Bachelot House. Tonight, when we were here yesterday afternoon, around 4:30 or 5, it was low tide. The number was right down on the 1, and now it's about as high as it could get. almost as high as it can get. It's at the high tide level. So overnight, the tide came in. We are at St. Mary's Waterfront Park. It's a beautiful park. And I like it here because not only is it beautiful and well traveled, a lot going on here this morning, as was yesterday afternoon when we were here. They also have free Wi-Fi in the park, which means if you want to do some work, like I did this morning, I sent out my cryptocurrency newsletter, Cryptocracy. It goes out Saturday morning, and I came into the park here, got to work on that, and sent it out to my subscribers. And that's how I spent my morning, but now you can see St. Mary's River right here in front of us. There's a dock with a private boat out there, somebody's boat. Cumberland Island out there in the distance. Really is a beautiful river. They also call it Black River because of a substance called tannin that floats in here. It's a leach from the vegetation that grows up all around the river here, and they call it Black River. This river has been used by pirates, smugglers, Indian canoes, and of course the U.S. and foreign shipping industries. And St. Mary's River is also the rock shrimp capital of Georgia. So, a lot going on there in that river. It's a beautiful river. A little gazebo there in the center of the park. Looks like it gets quite a bit of use. There is an amphitheater here at the end of this walkway here along the river front. I would imagine
some kind of jazzercise or something.
And then there's a fountain in the center of the park. Really quite beautiful. Very well kept park. Well maintained. And of course this is also where we had lunch. There are picnic tables here to the left of our fountain area. We got benches all around here and this around the fountain, and then there are picnic tables right around there. There's a little library right there. Free library. You can take a book or leave a book if you wish. Maybe do both. Take a book and leave a book. Yep, this is the St. Mary's History Walk, and what it is, it's 600 feet of walking path through these trees with little historical markers and panels that tell the story of St. Mary's history, key events in the history of the town. You can see scattered throughout the little markers all along the path. There's a gazebo and another historical marker over here beside the cemetery. And so right here, the very first marker we see, the lost Native Americans of the southeast coast. And so it talks about the Indians who were here prior to the Europeans showing up. It was populated by the Timucua Indians. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but they're known as the Mocama. And it looks like they were lost, many of them, to infectious disease and conflict, and ended up being evacuated to Cuba by the Spanish in 1763. And they lived in villages of 30 homes with 200 to 300 people, cultivated corn, beans, squash, and tobacco, and hunted game with bows and arrows, and gathered shellfish along the river here. It looks like they were also quite adept at tattooing. The tattooed Native Americans. And so if you walk the whole trail here, which we're not going to do today, but you'll learn the whole city of St. Mary's. This talks about the town starting as Buttermilk Bluff, conceived by the British in 1767, with articles of agreement signed in Cumberland on Cumberland Island in 1787, when the original owner, Jacob Weed, divided it and sold it into 4 plot acres of land to 19 other men for $38 each. And so that's how we 600 feet here with the history of St. Mary's. Really interesting. I'm going to run over here to the last one on the trail, and so you can see how history develops. If you want to know, somewhere up in there it talks about, I'm sure, the burning of St. Mary's during the Civil War. Right here, St. Mary's, a military town for 200 plus years. By 1740, English General James Oglethorpe had established 2 forts, St. Andrew and Fort William, on Cumberland Island to monitor the Spanish to the south. And then later on, Fort Tammany, built in the early 1790s, was housed here between St. Mary's and Wheeler Streets, staffed with Federal Dragoons, which were here for about 20 years. And then during World War II, Cumberland Island residents had submarine, they watched for submarines, German submarines, offshore, and so they monitored the Germans from Cumberland Island. And then during the Cold War, they had Kings Bay Army Terminal here, and then in 1978 it became Kings Bay Naval Submarine Base, and is home to America's ballistic missile submarines for the Atlantic Fleet. And so it's still a military town, still a lot going on. Again, we're the only people in this section of town. Christ Episcopal Church. It was originally built in 1843, but the British burned it down during the Civil War, and then it was reconstructed again in 1889. So this is the 1889 version of the church. So you can see it's a beautiful building with the red door in front. And also located on this property is a live oak tree, maybe that one there. That's 300 years old and is reportedly the oldest living live oak tree in St. Mary's.
First Presbyterian church was built in 1808.
Yep, it's on here.
Evidently was not one of the buildings burned by the...
It's actually the oldest church building in St. Mary's, built in 1808 as a Union church. In 1821, Horace Pratt, an ordained Presbyterian minister, came to St. Mary's, and this church became a Presbyterian church. So it was redesignated from a Union church to a Presbyterian church.
It's a beautiful little church.
It is gorgeous.
And they did not add on to it. They built separate buildings.
But they did modify it. Originally there was a double-sided staircase on the east side of the building, and the bell tower was on the north end.
Okay. So it was modified.
Legend has it that smugglers needed a distraction to allow them to unload their contraband and leave St. Mary's undetected, so they captured the minister's horse and hoisted him into the belfry. His movements would cause the bell to ring continuously. This was a cause for alarm back then, and people were indeed preoccupied with the ringing bell while the smugglers unloaded their contraband and left St. Mary's undetected. They attempted to burn the church during the Civil War, but the congregation prayed for rain, and the fire was put out by the rain.
Okay.
I guess the Episcopals need to learn how to pray.
Not
well,
nice at
maybe
all.
not the current day Episcopals, but maybe the ones that were back then. I don't know. Maybe they didn't pray well enough.
It's a pretty little church, though. I'm real not sure what Washington, Pump, and Oak is, but we're going to find out. There were originally 6 wells, one in each square, the only source of pure water for St. Mary's until the tidal wave of 1818. On the day that the father of his country was buried at Mount Vernon, local services were also held throughout the nation. St. Mary's citizens marched to the dock to meet a boat bearing a flag-draped casket, bore it up Osborne Street, and with due ceremony and firing of guns, buried it where the well known as Washington Pump now is. To mark this spot, 4 oaks were planted and have since been known as the Washington Oaks. Only this one remains. This well was driven the year of Washington's burial and has ever since been called the Washington Pump.
Yeah, following the death of President George Washington on December 14, 1799, local citizens and members of Camden Lodge number 16 planted 6 oak trees at a memorial service honoring this famous statesman, soldier, and Freemason. The monument marks the spot of the last of these oak trees, which was removed in 1987.
Well, that's why I couldn't find no oak tree. And this is Orange Hill over here.
So there's some controversy about when this building was built, actually. Sometime between 1829 and 1833, for Horace Pratt and his wife, Jane Wood Pratt, by her father, John Wood. But both Jane and her father died before construction began. And so, it had to be done by other people, I suppose. So this is the Ratcliffe Hopper Todd Woods house. And Sea Captain George W. Ratcliffe from Maine bought this lot and built his house in 1840. You see a 2-story mortise and tenon brace frame house, chamfered posts and balusters on its single-story front porch with Italianate arched glazing in the paired doors. Has a ballast stone walkway built with ballast stones from Captain Ratcliffe's ship. He sold 2 acres in 1849 and went to California. He died searching for gold. This Christian congregation in St. Mary's, founded in 1799, and it's also the home of Florida Methodism, because missionaries were sent down St. Mary's River into Spanish Florida, where they did missions. The original building was built in 1812 and moved when they decided they needed a new chapel. The new chapel was built from 1856 to 1858. During the Civil War, the Quartermaster Corps of the 9th Maine Regiment used this building as a butcher shop. And world-renowned Methodist minister Arthur J. Moore began his ministry in this chapel in 1909. The Archibald House is the oldest structure in town, built in 1801 by Revolutionary War soldier Charles Jackson. In 1804, Major Clark bought the home, and it's been known as the Archibald Clark House ever since. He was the mayor of St. Mary's, and President Thomas Jefferson appointed him customs agent to collect taxes from ships in the port of St. Mary's. The house has some significant history. In 1812, during the War of 1812, the British admiral of the Primrose sailed on St. Mary's with the intent of taking customs money that Clark had already spirited out of town for safekeeping. This house was then commandeered by the British as their headquarters. So some really interesting some history here. When Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr ran for president in 1800, Hamilton supported Jefferson and was instrumental in Burr's defeat. Hamilton despised Burr and criticized him publicly, leading to Burr's political downfall and the resulting duel, the famous duel. The house had only 2 rooms. So why is that significant about Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton? It's because Aaron Burr, who was vice president at the time, stayed here while fleeing after his duel with the Secretary of Treasury Alexander Hamilton, who was also one of the founding fathers of the country. So interesting. Aaron Burr stayed here when he ran from that duel. So great. This is awesome stuff. Awesome history. Is the Bachelot Porterhouse. John Bachelot built this house in 1911. Cost him $4,500. He died in 1934. His widow lived here until her death in 1948. Gilman Paper Company bought the house to provide space for local medical services. The medical clinic was on the first floor and the dental clinic in the back of the house. A koi pond was in the garden behind the gazebo. The house is described as Queen Anne architectural style neoclassical revival in the amendment, St. Mary's Historic District Update, page 6, National Register of Historic Places. So there's an interesting little tidbit about the history of St. Mary's. Well, that concludes our trip here in St. Mary's. If you see the flyers that you see me hanging around and waving all over the place, these are the walking tour notes, and we always stop by the visitor center before we enter a town and start walking, just so we can understand a little about the history. I don't want to read to you, so I try to brush up on it before we get on camera. Sometimes I don't do that perfectly, so you might hear me reading, but I try to paraphrase it so it doesn't come across stilted and just reads more interestingly or sounds more interestingly to you. Hey, don't forget, subscribe to the channel, share us with your friend, and if you like the video, click that like button. We'll see you next week as we tour a little bit more of the Southeast, and we're looking forward to sharing some great small towns with you.